We don't have that kind of money lying around, Natalie. You need to be realistic about this. My father stood in the doorway of my apartment, arms crossed, face like stone. Behind him, my mother nodded along, her mouth pressed into that thin line I'd known my entire life, the line that meant I was asking for too much. Again. And in the next room, my 7-year-old son Michael lay sleeping, his small chest rising and falling with the mechanical hiss of the oxygen machine. $85,000. That was the number printed on the medical quote sitting on my kitchen table. $85,000 to save my son's life. You won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, please hit that subscribe button. This story gets wild, and you're going to want to hear every single word. Trust me on this. My name is Natalie. I'm 31 years old, and this is the story of how my parents chose a party over their grandson's life, and how I made sure they never forgot it. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment when everything started to unravel, to the day when I realized that family doesn't always mean what you think it means. Michael was born on a Tuesday in March, 7 years ago. He came out screaming, his tiny fists clenched like he was ready to fight the world. And fight he would, because at 3 months old, during a routine checkup, our pediatrician heard something, a murmur, a whisper in his heartbeat that shouldn't have been there. Congenital heart defect. The words hit me like a physical blow. Rare, complex, life-threatening. His father, Derek, looked at the doctor, then at me, then at our baby in my arms. He stayed for 3 more months. 3 months of hospital visits and specialists and tests that Michael screamed through while I held his tiny hands. 3 months of watching Derek's eyes grow more distant every day. Then one morning I woke up and he was gone. A note on the kitchen counter. I'm sorry, I can't do this. The checking account was cleaned out. His clothes were gone. His phone went straight to voicemail. I never heard from him again. That was 4 years ago. 4 years of fighting this battle alone. 4 years of being Michael's mother, his nurse, his advocate, his whole world. 4 years of watching other kids run and play while my son sat on the sidelines, saving his energy, his lips sometimes turning that terrifying shade of blue that sent me into panic mode. But he was alive. My beautiful, funny, impossibly brave little boy was alive, and I was determined to keep him that way. I lived in Columbus, Ohio, in a small 1-bedroom apartment that cost more than I could afford. I taught 7th grade science at Roosevelt Middle School, a job I loved but that barely covered our expenses. Medical bills piled up faster than I could pay them. My credit cards were maxed. My savings account had been empty for years. My parents, Richard and Susan Mitchell, lived 20 minutes away in their comfortable 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, the house where they'd raised me, and my younger sister Olivia, the house that still had Olivia's childhood bedroom preserved like a museum, with her cheerleading trophies and dance recital photos covering every surface. I'd asked them for help before. Small amounts. 500 here, 1,000 there. They always gave it reluctantly, with lectures about financial responsibility and making better choices. As if I'd chosen to have a sick child. As if I'd chosen to be abandoned by my child's father. As if I'd chosen any of this. But I'd always paid them back. Every penny. Even when it meant eating rice and beans for weeks. Even when it meant my own health suffered. I paid them back because I needed them to see that I was responsible. That I was trying. That I deserved their help. This time was different. This time it wasn't about covering rent or groceries. This time it was about Michael's life. His condition had been manageable for years with medication and careful monitoring. We'd had 3 surgeries already. Operations that my parents had helped pay for. Operations that I'd paid them back for, slowly, painfully, over years. But now his heart was failing. The doctors said he had 6 months, maybe less, without a specialized treatment. An experimental procedure that insurance wouldn't cover. A treatment that cost $85,000. I'd spent weeks researching every possible option. Medical loans with interest rates so high they made me physically ill. Payment plans that would take decades. Crowdfunding campaigns that barely raised $12,000 despite my desperate pleas. And Michael's sweet face smiling from the photos. I'd sold everything of value. My grandmother's ring that was supposed to go to Michael's future wife. My car, replaced with a 15-year-old sedan that broke down twice a month. I'd moved from our 1-bedroom apartment to a studio to save $300 a month, $300 that disappeared into the vast ocean of medical debt. Nothing was enough. Time was running out. The doctors said we needed to act now. In 3 months, Michael would be too sick for the treatment to work. In 6 months, he'd be gone. So I went to my parents. I brought the medical files, the cost estimates, the doctor's prognosis. I laid it all out on their dining room table, in the house where I'd grown up. In the room where we'd celebrated countless holidays and birthdays. I'm not asking for a gift, I told them. I'm asking for a loan. I'll pay you back. I'll get a second job. I'll do whatever it takes. I just need my son to live." My father looked at the numbers. My mother looked at him. And then they said no. "We don't have that kind of money lying around. You need to be realistic." Realistic. As if there was something realistic about choosing whether your grandson lives or dies based on your bank balance. "But Dad," I tried again. "You helped Olivia buy her condo last year. You co-signed for $30,000. That's different," my mother interrupted. "That's an investment. This is," she gestured vaguely at the medical papers, "this is just throwing money at a problem that might not have a solution." A problem. My son was a problem. I left their house that day feeling something inside me crack, not my heart. That had been broken for years. This was something deeper, some fundamental belief about family and love and what parents owe their children. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. It was Olivia, my 28-year-old sister. Her voice was breathless with excitement, the way it always was when something good happened in her perfect life. "Natalie, I have the most amazing news," Brandon proposed. "We're getting married." I tried to sound happy, tried to muster enthusiasm past the exhaustion and fear that had become my constant companions. "That's wonderful, Liv. Congratulations. And get this," she continued, barely pausing for breath. "Mom and Dad are being so incredibly generous. They're paying for the whole wedding. Can you believe it? They said we can have whatever we want. No budget. I'm thinking destination wedding. Maybe Tuscany. Or the French Riviera. Oh, Natalie, it's going to be absolutely perfect. No budget." Those words echoed in my head as I stood in my tiny apartment, medical bills covering every surface, my son's oxygen machine humming in the background. No budget for a wedding, but no help for a dying child. "How much are you thinking?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "Oh, I don't know exactly. Brandon and I are meeting with wedding planners next week, but Mom said probably around 200,000, maybe 250 with all the extras." Isn't that amazing? $200,000. More than twice what I needed to save Michael's life. I hung up the phone and sat in the dark for a long time. Michael called out from his bed, asking for water. I brought it to him, helped him drink, smoothed his hair back from his forehead. His skin felt too warm. His breathing was labored even with the oxygen. "Mom," he whispered, "when am I going to feel better?" "Soon, baby, soon." But we both knew I was lying. The next 6 months were a nightmare in slow motion. Michael's condition deteriorated. The emergency room visits became more frequent. The doctor's expressions grew more grave. The experimental treatment window closed. We moved to palliative care, a term that felt like giving up even though the doctors assured me it was about comfort and quality of life. Quality of life. What quality was there in watching your child slowly suffocate? What quality was there in counting every breath, measuring every heartbeat, knowing each day might be the last? Through it all, Olivia's wedding plans progressed like some obscene counterpoint to my tragedy. Every family gathering, every phone call, every interaction somehow circled back to the wedding. My parents were consumed by it. They attended tastings at 5-star restaurants. They toured venues via video call with Italian wedding planners. They discussed flower arrangements that cost more than my monthly salary. I tried to be happy for my sister. I really did. There was a time when we were close, when she was my best friend and confidant. But that closeness had faded over the years as it became clear that our parents saw us very differently. Olivia was the golden child, the one who did everything right. She graduated college with honors, landed a high-paying job in marketing, dated men from good families with good prospects. She was everything parents could want in a daughter. I was the disappointment, the one who got pregnant at 23 by a man who turned out to be worthless, the one who chose teaching over a more lucrative career, the one who couldn't even keep her own child healthy. The wedding cost breakdowns started arriving in family group texts. The venue in Tuscany, $80,000. The dress from a famous designer, $15,000. The photographer, $12,000. First-class flights for immediate family, $10,000. The rehearsal dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant, $22,000. Flowers imported from Holland, $18,000. A private chef for the welcome dinner, $8,000. Custom invitations with gold embossing, $6,000 for 150 guests. The bachelorette party, a week in the Bahamas, all expenses paid by my parents. $10,000 for Olivia and 8 friends to drink Mai Tais and get spa treatments while my son lay in a hospital bed. I did the math obsessively. Every announcement, every excited text message, I converted into medical treatments we couldn't afford. The flowers could have been 3 months of physical therapy. The photographer could have been a year of medications. The venue alone could have paid for Michael's life. My mother called one evening. "Natalie, honey, we need to talk about the wedding." "What about it?" I was exhausted. Michael had been in the hospital for 3 days. I'd missed work. My principal was understanding, but there were limits to how many days I could take. Well, Olivia wants you to be a bridesmaid. The dresses are $300. We need you to order yours soon. $300. Almost enough for 2 weeks of Michael's medications. I don't know if I can afford that right now. The pause on the other end of the line was heavy with judgment. Natalie, this is your sister's wedding. Surely you can find $300. It's 8 months away. Mom, things are really tight. Michael's medical expenses keep increasing. You're always talking about Michael's medical expenses, she interrupted, her voice taking on an edge I knew too well. I understand he's sick, but life goes on for the rest of us. This is Olivia's special day. Can't you put your own problems aside for one day to celebrate your sister? My own problems. My dying son was a problem I needed to put aside. I'll think about it, I said, because it was easier than fighting. The deadline for ordering is next week. Olivia has her heart set on having you in the wedding party. Don't disappoint her, Natalie. She's been through so much stress with all this planning. Stress. Planning a $250,000 wedding funded by our parents was stressful. I hung up and cried. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and primal, the place where mothers keep their most desperate fears. October brought a cold snap that seemed to settle into Michael's bones. He was in and out of the hospital, his small body fighting a battle it couldn't win. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about weeks, not months. I spent every possible moment beside his bed, reading him stories, telling him about heaven, holding his hand through the pain. He was so brave, so impossibly, heartbreakingly brave. Why am I so tired, Mom? He asked one afternoon. Your heart is working very hard, baby. It's doing the best it can. Is it going to stop working? 7 years old, and he understood. He knew what was coming. I don't know, sweetheart. But whatever happens, I'll be right here with you. I'll never leave you. I'm scared, he whispered. Me too, baby. Me too. My parents visited occasionally, usually on their way to or from some wedding-related appointment. They'd stay 20 minutes, pat Michael's hand awkwardly, and leave with barely concealed relief. They were uncomfortable around death, around failure, around the evidence of their own choices. Olivia came once. She stood in the doorway of Michael's hospital room, perfectly dressed in clothes that probably cost more than my rent, and lasted 5 minutes before claiming she had a dress fitting. He's so thin, she whispered to me in the hallway, as if this was news. As if I hadn't watched my son waste away day by day. Yes, I said simply. It must be so hard for you. She touched my arm in a gesture that might have been meant as comfort but felt performative. But you're so strong, Natalie. You always have been. Strong. I'd heard that word 100 times, usually from people who were relieved they didn't have to be strong themselves. The wedding is in 3 weeks, Olivia continued. I really hope you'll reconsider being a bridesmaid. It would mean so much to me. And honestly, it might be good for you. A break from all this. A chance to celebrate something happy. A break. As if I could vacation from my son's death. I'll think about it, I lied. November 23rd. That was the day Michael died. A Tuesday morning, cold and gray. He'd been unconscious for 2 days, his breathing becoming more labored with each hour. I held his hand and talked to him about everything and nothing. About how proud I was of him. About how much I loved him. About how it was okay to let go. At 9:17 in the morning, his heart stopped. The nurses were kind. They gave me time alone with him. Time to hold his still, warm body and memorize every feature of his face. Time to say goodbye to the child who'd been my entire world for 7 years. I called my parents from the hospital. My mother answered. Mom, I said, my voice hollow. Michael's gone. There was a pause. Oh, Natalie. I'm so sorry. We'll come right away. They arrived an hour later. They stayed 15 minutes. My father looked uncomfortable. My mother cried a little but seemed more concerned with the mascara running down her face than with my devastation. Have you thought about funeral arrangements? My mother asked. Not yet. Well, you'll need to do that soon. She paused, glanced at my father. Natalie, I know this is terrible timing, but we need to talk about the wedding. It's this Saturday. We understand if you don't want to be a bridesmaid, but we'd really like you to attend. Olivia would be heartbroken if you weren't there. I stared at her. My son had been dead for 2 hours and she was talking about the wedding. The wedding is 3 days after Michael's funeral, I said slowly. Yes, well, we booked the venue a year ago. Everything's set. Guests are flying in from all over. We can't cancel now. And honestly, Natalie, being around family might help you process this. You shouldn't be alone. They left soon after. I sat in that hospital room with my dead son and felt something fundamental shift inside me. Not grief. That was everywhere, crushing me from all sides. This was something else. Something cold and clear and utterly ruthless. Understanding. I understood. Finally and completely, what I meant to them. What Michael had meant to them. We were inconveniences, problems, disappointments. While Olivia was the daughter worth celebrating, worth $250,000, worth every ounce of pride and love they possessed. I buried Michael on a Thursday. I paid for it with money I borrowed from my Aunt Teresa, the only family member who'd consistently tried to help. It was a small service, maybe 30 people, teachers from my school, a few of Michael's friends from the hospital, other sick children who understood what he'd been through, Aunt Teresa and a few distant cousins. My parents came. They sat in the back. They left before the reception, citing the need to prepare for Olivia's rehearsal dinner. Olivia didn't come at all. She sent flowers with a note. So sorry for your loss. Can't wait to see you at the wedding. Love, Liv. 3 days later, I watched my sister marry Brandon at a villa in Tuscany. Well, I watched it via video call. I couldn't afford the flight, couldn't afford to take time off work, couldn't afford anything except the slowly accumulating debt from a child who died anyway. The wedding was everything Olivia had dreamed. The venue was stunning, all old stone and cypress trees. The flowers were perfect. The food was exquisite. The photographer captured every moment of her joy. My parents looked radiant, proud, happy. Their golden child was marrying well, and the weather had cooperated, and the speeches were touching, and everything was perfect. They'd spent $230,000 on one day of celebration, 3 days after burying their grandson who'd died, because they wouldn't spend $85,000 to save him. I watched it all through a phone screen and felt nothing but ice in my chest. After the wedding, life continued. I returned to work. I tried to rebuild some semblance of normalcy. The grief was overwhelming, but I functioned. I had to. Bills didn't stop coming just because your child died. My parents called occasionally. Awkward check-ins where they asked how I was doing and I gave vague answers. They never mentioned Michael. Never asked about how I was coping. They preferred to pretend he'd never existed. Easier that way. Olivia sent photos from her honeymoon. 2 weeks in the Maldives, another gift from our parents. She looked happy in every picture, tanned and glowing and utterly oblivious to anything beyond her perfect life. I started therapy. I needed help processing the layers of grief and anger and betrayal. My therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Patterson, listened to my story and then said something that changed everything. You know what happened wasn't your fault, right? You did everything humanly possible to save your son. I know that intellectually, but emotionally, she interrupted gently, you're carrying guilt that belongs to other people. Your parents made choices. Those choices had consequences. Their guilt is not yours to carry, but they're my parents. They don't see it that way. Then perhaps they need to be shown. That conversation planted a seed. It grew slowly over the next few years, fed by every ignored phone call, every missed acknowledgement of Michael's birthday or death anniversary, every mention of Olivia's perfect life while I struggled to pay off medical debt for a dead child. 4 years passed. 4 years of rebuilding my life. I changed schools, moved to a new city 3 hours away, started fresh where nobody knew my story, made new friends who'd never met Michael, which was both a relief and a fresh wound every time. I worked 2 jobs and slowly, painfully, climbed out of debt. I dated cautiously, built a life that felt almost normal, and then my father called. Natalie, his voice was strained. We need to talk. Can you come visit this weekend? It's important. I drove the 3 hours back to Columbus on a Saturday in March, the 4th anniversary of Michael's death. I doubted my parents remembered. They looked older. My father's hair had gone completely gray. My mother's face showed new lines of stress. The house looked the same, though. Still perfectly maintained. Still comfortable. Still the home that had chosen parties over children. Thank you for coming, my mother said, gesturing to the living room. She'd made coffee, set out cookies on a plate, as if this were a social call. What's this about? I asked. They looked at each other. My father cleared his throat. We're in financial trouble, he said bluntly. Serious trouble. I lost my job 6 months ago. The company downsized. At my age, it's been impossible to find something comparable. Your mother's income can't cover all our expenses. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank is threatening foreclosure. I waited. We need help, my mother added. We need $90,000 to catch up on everything and stay afloat until your father finds work. $90,000. $5,000 more than they'd refused to save Michael's life. I see, I said calmly. We know it's a lot, my father rushed on, but we're desperate. We've exhausted every other option. The bank won't extend our line of credit. We've asked friends, but nobody has that kind of money available. You're our last hope. I'm your last hope, I repeated slowly. Yes, my mother said. We know you've been doing well. We heard you got a promotion. that you're managing better financially. We wouldn't ask if we had any other choice. I looked around the living room, at the expensive furniture, the artwork on the walls, the family photos that included Olivia's wedding but not a single picture of Michael. What about Olivia? I asked. Can't she help? My father shook his head. She and Brandon just bought a new house. They're stretched thin with their own mortgage. We can't ask them. But you can ask me. Natalie, please. My mother's voice broke. This is our home. We'll lose everything. Everything, I said. Tell me, if you lose the house, where will you live? We'd have to move into an apartment. Something small, affordable. The shame of it. After everything we've worked for. Small and affordable, I mused. Like the studio apartment I lived in while Michael was dying. The one where we shared a bed because there wasn't room for two. Where I chose between heating and medication. Where I held my son while he struggled to breathe and wondered why his grandparents couldn't spare the money to save him. The room went very quiet. Natalie, my father said carefully, I know you're still angry about Michael, but that was different. We couldn't have known. Different? I stood up. How was it different? You had the money then just like you don't have it now. You chose not to help a dying child but spent $230,000 on a wedding 3 days later. Those are the facts. We couldn't just empty our retirement accounts, my mother protested. But you did, I said. For the wedding, for Olivia's condo, for her honeymoon, you emptied them for everything except the one thing that actually mattered. And now you want me to save you from the consequences of those choices? We're your parents, my father said, his voice rising. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I picked up my purse. It means I learned who you really are, what I really mean to you. And I'll show you the same consideration you showed Michael when he needed you most. I walked toward the door. Wait, my mother called out. Natalie, please, don't do this. We're family. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. I'll think about it, I said. But you will help? There was desperate hope in her voice. I said I'll think about it. I'll be in touch. I drove home and thought about it for exactly 1 week. 1 week to consider all my options. 1 week to remember Michael's face when he asked why he was so tired. 1 week to recall my parents leaving his funeral early for a rehearsal dinner. 1 week to think about what family really means. Then I called my father. I'll help you, I said. But on my terms. Anything, he said immediately. Whatever you need. Payment plans, interest, collateral. Meet me at your house tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Come alone, just you and Mom. Don't tell Olivia. The next day, I arrived with a folder. Inside was a check for $90,000, money I'd scraped together from my savings, from a personal loan, from selling the car I'd finally saved up to buy. It represented most of what I had. I also brought a document, a contract. My parents sat across from me in their living room, the same room where they'd refused to help Michael, the same furniture, the same air of comfortable denial. I'll give you the $90,000, I said, but there are conditions. Hope bloomed on their faces. My father reached for the check. I held it back. First condition. You acknowledge, here and now, that you chose Olivia's wedding over Michael's life, that you had the money and refused to help. I want to hear you say it out loud. Natalie, my mother started. Say it, I interrupted. Say that you spent $230,000 on 1 day of celebration while letting your grandson die. Say that you chose flowers and food and photos over your daughter's child. Say it. My father's face was red. This is humiliating, is it? Was it humiliating when I begged you for help? When I stood in this very room with medical bills and you told me to be realistic? When I buried my son with borrowed money while you celebrated 3 days later? Was that humiliating for you? My mother was crying. We made a mistake. We thought there would be more time. We thought you'd find another way. There was no other way, I said flatly. I tried everything. You were my last hope, just like I'm yours now. And you said no. You chose Olivia's party over Michael's life. Say it. The silence stretched on. Finally, my father spoke. His voice was barely audible. We chose the wedding. We had the money. We chose to spend it on Olivia's wedding instead of Michael's treatment. And? I prompted. And he died because we didn't help, my mother whispered. We should have saved him. We were wrong. I turned to my father. Do you agree? Yes, he said, his voice hollow. We were wrong. It was the worst decision we ever made. Good, I said. That acknowledgement is the first part of the price. There's more? My mother asked. I slid the check across the table. Here's your $90,000, but there are 2 conditions attached. We'll sign anything, my father said quickly. First, you take this money and never contact me again. No calls, no texts, no emails, no birthday cards, no Christmas gifts, no wedding announcements if Olivia gets remarried. You remove me from your lives completely. The way you removed Michael from your memories. The way you pretended he never existed 3 days after his funeral. Natalie, you can't mean that, my mother said. We're family. No, I corrected. We share DNA. Family shows up. Family sacrifices. Family doesn't let children die while planning parties. You stopped being my family the day you chose a wedding over my son's life. And the second condition? My father asked. I pulled out the document. This is a formal legal agreement. It states that you acknowledge you had the financial means to help Michael and chose not to. It states that you understand the consequences of your decision, and it states that in exchange for this $90,000, you waive all future claims to any relationship with me. No inheritance expectations. No elder care obligations. Nothing. We're done. You're legally severing ties? My father said. Yes. They stared at me, then at the check, then at each other. I watched them calculate, watched them weigh their pride against their desperation, watched them choose, once again, what mattered more. It took them 43 seconds. My father picked up the check and signed the document. My mother signed with shaking hands. Their signatures meant more to me than any apology ever could. They meant I was finally free. I stood up. You have your money. I have my closure. Don't contact me again. My father looked at me with something I'd never seen before. Shame. Real, genuine shame. We'll regret this, he said. Yes, I replied. You'll regret it for the rest of your lives. Just like I'll spend the rest of mine missing Michael. The difference is, you earned your regret. I didn't earn mine. I walked out of that house for the last time. Over the next few months, I heard through mutual acquaintances what happened to them. My parents saved their house but lost their social standing. Word got out somehow about why their daughter had cut them off. The story spread through their country club, their church, their neighborhood. They were quietly ostracized. Invitations stopped coming. Friends grew distant. Their comfortable life became a prison of their own choices. Olivia called me once, 6 months later. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. What you did was cruel, she said without preamble. Mom is devastated. Dad looks broken. How could you do that to them? I gave them exactly what they gave me, I said calmly. Consequences. They gave you $90,000, she protested. They gave me back a fraction of what they stole from Michael. And they only did it because they were desperate. Just like I was desperate when Michael was dying. The difference is, I was asking to save a life. They were asking to save their house. You're never going to forgive them, are you? I don't hate them, I said, and realized it was true. Hate requires caring. I don't care anymore. They stopped being my family the day they chose your party over my son's life. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, a harsh sound. You got a $230,000 wedding while my son died because they wouldn't spend $85,000 to save him. Don't talk to me about fair, Olivia. You don't get to use that word. She was quiet for a long moment. I didn't know it was that much money. For the wedding. Yes, you did, I said gently. You knew exactly what they were spending. You just didn't care enough to question where it was coming from. You didn't wonder why I couldn't afford to be in your bridal party while you got unlimited funds. You didn't think about Michael dying while you planned your bachelorette party. You knew, Olivia. You just chose not to see. She hung up without saying goodbye. I heard she and Brandon moved to another state a year later, trying to escape the whispers and judgment that followed the story, trying to start fresh where nobody knew what their fairy tale wedding had cost. As for me, I continued building my life. I dated, eventually, made real friends, the kind who showed up when things were hard. I traveled to places Michael would have loved and scattered symbolic flowers in his memory. I volunteered at a children's hospital, reading to kids who were fighting the same battles Michael had fought. I lived, not just surviving but actually living, building a life that honored his memory and my own worth. The $90,000 I gave my parents was worth every penny, not because they deserved help, but because it gave me closure, because it proved I was the better person, because I'd shown mercy even when none had been shown to me. And then I'd walked away, leaving them to live with the weight of their choices. Some people say I was cruel. That real forgiveness means helping without conditions. That family is family, no matter what. But those people never watched their child die alone while their family celebrated elsewhere. They never had to bury their baby with borrowed money while knowing a fortune had been spent on cake and flowers. They never stood at a graveside on a cold March morning and realized that some family ties are better severed than preserved. I gave my parents what they'd asked for, on my terms. I lived up to my obligation as their daughter one final time, and then I closed that door forever, just as they'd closed the door on Michael when he needed them most. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about balance, about ensuring that consequences met actions. They taught me that love had limits, that some lives mattered more than others, that family was conditional. I simply returned their lessons wrapped in a check they couldn't refuse and a truth they couldn't escape. And I moved forward into a future they'd never be part of, carrying Michael's memory with me, finally at peace. 4 years ago today, my son died because my parents valued a party more than his life. Now they live with that choice every single day, and I sleep just fine.